all had moments that break us down, searching for light when the world spins round. But in those cracks, the purpose is born, a new way to live when the old is torn. It's more than a story, it's the rise from the fall, a place where your purpose starts to call. With Dr. Stephenson, wisdom takes flight, turning your pain into hope, into light. Collide with purpose, embrace the change. Every story's got a fire in its flame. Tune in, listen, find your way to take life's hardest hits and turn the page. In the podcast, the truth is found. Collide with purpose, let love abound. From heartbreak to strength, the lessons unfold. It's about how we rise, not the stories we've told. Guests with their journeys, sharing their light. In every collision, there's power in sight. It's more than a talk, it's the wisdom we gain through every struggle, through every pain. With conversations that open the door to purpose, to power, to so much more. Collide with purpose, embrace the change. Every story's got a fire in its flame. Tune in, listen, find your way to take life's hardest hits and turn the page. In the podcast, the truth is found. Collide with purpose, let love abound. So come as you are, with your scars and fears. This is the place where the truth appears. Turn your trials into stepping stones. Find the strength to claim your throne. Collide with purpose, embrace the change. Every story's got a fire in its flame. Tune in, listen, find your way to take life's hardest hits and turn the page. In the podcast, the truth is found. Collide with purpose, let love abound. A collision with purpose, your journey starts here. In every conversation, we'll wipe away fear. Find your purpose, let your life ignite. With Dr. Stephenson, you'll find your light.
Right, welcome to Life-Changing Conversations to Inspire Actions. Today we are taking a powerful journey into a place and a time that shaped not only one man's destination, but the soul of a people. The Black Belt region from Alabama, stretching across the deep south of the United States, was once known for its rich, dark soil, ideal for agriculture. But over time, the name also came to symbolize the history and enduring struggle of the Black communities who lived there, many descended from enslaved Africans. Life in the Black Belt region was marked by hard work, deep faith, tight-knit families, and a relentless fight for dignity amid the heavy grip of segregation. Today, we are honored to sit down with Dr. Hines, a man who was raised in Uniontown, Alabama, during the era before racial integration. He witnessed firsthand the barriers, the bravery, and the brilliance that grew from soil. Through his history, we will uncover lessons about resilience, hope, and the unbreakable human spirit. So lean in, because this conversation is more than history. It is a blueprint for courage, perseverance, and vision in our own lives today. Dr. Hines, a man whose life work has been marked by one consistent theme: excellence. From his early days as a top-performing pharmaceutical sales professional to his impactful role as an educator and entrepreneur, Dr. Hines has always led with integrity, compassion, and yes, with purpose. Whether enhancing quality of life for seniors and special needs, youth in assisted living, pioneering alternative teaching methods in the school system, or guiding families through real estate decisions, his commitment to service shines through. Now retired from education, Dr. Hines continues to serve his community through real estate consulting, nonprofit involvement, and as a proud member and deacon in the Baptist Church. Folks, let us welcome Dr. Art Hines to the show.
How are you, Dr. Laxley Stephenson? How are you today?
Man, I'm doing awesome. It's so good to have you on, and especially
Thank you.
to talk about what we're going to talk about today.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's so good to be here, and I'm so honored to be speaking with you today.
Man, today, Dr. Hines, we're going to dive into a powerful story about resilience, identity, and transformation. Growing up in Uniontown, Alabama, in the heart of the Black Belt before racial integration, that's big stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely.
Go ahead.
Growing up there in the Black Belt is a interesting thing in that there was so much diversity in the fact that we were in the Black Belt, but we were still very diverse. So that's one of the interesting, to me, that's one of the interesting things about growing up in the Black Belt.
Mm-hmm. Well, Dr. Hines, when you think about your childhood in Uniontown, Alabama, what are some of the very first memories that come to mind?
Well, it was a warm, loving community. Many of our members of our community had large families. And the reason for the large families in many instances was that we were raised on farms, agrarian. In my early years, we were cotton farmers. And cotton farming is very labor intensive. So the more hands you had to work the fields, the better it was. So I think that was one of the impetus behind having large families. So I grew up in a family of 10 children, and we all, I would say we all, up to a point in time, I think the younger siblings escaped a lot of that work because the cotton farming actually went out of vogue in the early 60s. So I got a taste of it. I was about 10, 11 years old when it went out. But at the same time, my older siblings got a full dose, and some of my younger siblings didn't get any of it. So, yeah.
But you got a taste.
Yeah, I got a nice taste. Yeah.
Explain what a taste is.
A taste of it is when you rise in the morning, you know that there is going to be work on your agenda for that day. Now, this primarily takes place during the summer. Cotton farming is normally started in mid-April. Now, primarily the children in my family were in school during that time. But when school is out in May, then working on the farm became our full-time job for the summer. Luckily, my parents were those of the thought that the priority for my children will be to go to school when school is in, and if school is not in, go to work. work with the farm, work with the family, work with everything that has to be done. So work is not anything new to me.
And I experienced that because recently I went to Uniontown with you and I saw you in action. After a long day of just driving and working in the community and working at your former high school, you still went and did additional work before you drove back to Atlanta. So I know work is nothing new to you. And it's all because of your upbringing. Now, I want you to paint a picture. Paint a picture of what Uniontown was like in those days. What was Uniontown like?
Well, Uniontown was a predominantly black town. Now, we had white people who lived in Uniontown, but the percentages were smaller. And I would say generally, I don't know this to be exact, but I'd say about 85% of the people in Uniontown were black people. And I'd say about 15% of the people in Uniontown were white. Now, the discrepancy was that the white people were the ones who owned the businesses, the banks, the automobile dealership, the commercial establishments, the stores, the gas stations. And the black people were basically farmers, even though we did have a good amount of diversity amongst the black people, because the ones who were not farmers always found a way to be gainfully productive and to take care of themselves and their families. So that was done through a number of different entrepreneurial kinds of initiatives.
Mm-hmm. And you talk about working, in the cotton, doing the cotton thing. This was a business, a family-owned business, right?
Yes, it was. And see, cotton farming took different forms. Some people were what's called sharecroppers. In other words, they didn't have the resources to own the land or even to rent the land. And then what they would do is they would contract with a white landowner, and the white landowner would supply all of the necessary ingredients to create a cotton farm. He would supply all the seeds, all of the soil to plant it in, all of the equipment that you would need. And what the black sharecropper would do, they would do all the work. And then at the end of the year, when the crop is gathered, they would even gather the crop. And then the owner of the land, they would settle up. But there was a very unfair and unequal system based on the fact that a lot of the sharecrop owners of the land, when they would settle up after all of the harvest has been done, and you hear horror stories that in many instances, the owner of the land would tell the sharecropper that did all the work, well, congratulations and Merry Christmas to you. You don't owe me a dime. And he is taking all the money. So that was one of the very, very, very unfair practices that a lot of our people suffered. But fortunately, my family was in a different position where even though they owned some land, but at the same time, they rented some land, but they were totally independent as to what they did on the land, except they had to pay the rent.
So while you worked in the cotton fields, you worked for your parents.
Exactly. Yeah.
They employed you, so to speak.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, let's talk about the sense of community among Black families back then. How would you describe that?
Well, Black families were very diverse in Uniontown. When I say that, I mean diverse as far as education is concerned, diverse as far as employment, diverse as far as there were a good number of professional people. Everything that we did in Uniontown came, for the most part, through our own community.
Mm.
In other words, instead of relying on somebody else to step up to the plate and do what we need to do for ourselves, we never did that. Anything we needed to do, we did it ourselves. As far as using services that normally we would use today, say for example, if you had an issue with your car and it broke down and you go to a mechanic shop and let him fix it, we did that in some instances, but for the most part, we had to fix it ourselves.
Mm.
Anything that needed to be done, our attitude, well, let's get it done. So that was one of the good things about growing up in Uniontown. Self-reliance, you had to do it yourself.
You have to do it yourself.
Yes.
There are formal rules, laws, whatever you want to call it. But what were some of the unspoken rules or survival tactics that children in the Black Belt learned early on?
Well, a strong work ethic, I think, was probably one of the most prominent ones.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't a common thing for a child to just sit around and do nothing. I think as we got more liberties as far as right to vote that came normally in the mid 60s, I think that's when I saw more people relying on some other source for their source. They're saying, well, maybe I can get a check from the government or some of that nature, as opposed to, well, let's see, how can we make this happen? And do what we have to do to be okay.
Hmm.
So that was one of the changes that I saw during the mid 60s when integration started to kick in.
All right, let's talk about education before integration. Let's talk about education. And you stated earlier that your parents' education was a priority, big priority.
Absolutely.
What was your schooling experience like prior to integration?
Well, it may surprise you to hear that from my perspective, education was much better before integration
Mm.
than it was after integration. One of the primary reasons for that is that we had better teachers. Our top teachers were very learned people, very strong educators. And they put all of their time and their efforts and their energy into working with our people. But then after integration, to my dismay, a lot of those top tier teachers were actually recruited by the white schools. So they took our best teachers and put them in the white schools. And the same thing, the early years of integration. And I guess our people had a hand in it, but they did some of the same tactics in order to integrate the schools. Initially, they would take some of our top tier students, not many, but they would take some and put them in the white school to help to integrate the white school, to help to integrate. But I kind of felt like we're not gaining here, we're losing.
Wow.
But at the same time, you know, there were different tactics that were used because integration was not accepted wholeheartedly by all parties. I'll put it that way.
By all stakeholders. So,
Yeah.
you know, you shared a story with me about integration and how they just move an entire classroom.
Yeah. Now
Can you
that
share that with our audience?
yeah, that was a tactic early on during integration. Our first integration efforts and energy came from cherry picking some of our top students and putting them in the white schools. Now, I'm not really sure what the thinking was from the white schools perspective, but I would assume, based on the students that they were picking, that a lot of those students were probably much better student, much higher quality of student than the students in the white schools. And I think that sort of initiated an effort to kind of modify the integration. The integration, instead of integrating the school, you are in this 12th grade and you take this class and that class and that class, and you just go to the class, and whoever show up, that's who's in the class. But I think there was some effort to modify that for a year or so. And what that looked like was that they said, well, okay, I'll tell you what, we will bring the students that's going to integrate our school, we will bring them to the white school, but we will bring the student and their teacher. And what we will do is we will put them in a classroom in the white school, but they will remain intact as far as the students and the teachers. So that was a tactic that was tried, but it never really succeeded.
So what you're saying is that they would move an entire classroom and teach
Exactly. They would move
into the white school.
exactly.
And after class is over,
They go back to their
school.
Yeah.
So you just relocated a classroom and all the stakeholders in the classroom.
Exactly. But there was a tactic. See, we had a superintendent of schools, and I don't know if he was getting pressure from the white. I don't know what his motive. Maybe he was prejudices. I don't know. But it was one of his tactics that he decided that he would try. But it didn't go over very well because I had graduated from high school when that happened, but some of the students who were still there protested that tactic, and they decided, well, we're just not going to school. We're not coming up there. And they stuck to their guns, and they called for the superintendent, and the superintendent had to intervene by coming down to the black school. And when the superintendent intervened, you know, he got so much heat and pushback from the students until he had to change that half-baked idea on his tactics.
Dr. Hines, you attended Uniontown Elementary Negro School. Is that correct?
Well, the official name for our school when I was a first grader, Uniontown Negro Elementary School.
Mm-hmm.
So it was no ambiguity as to who goes to this school.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our town had two school systems. It had a system for the whites and had a system for the blacks. Now, I really didn't have any problem with that. I really didn't have, that's just the way it was. So I didn't have a problem with that. And come to find out later on, I think as long as we were integrated based on the quality of teachers we had, I think we were probably better off anyway.
Now, arguably, one of the reasons why you had better teachers is because there weren't hiring teachers, your black teachers in colleges.
Exactly.
So they taught at the lower level. So these were amazing teachers who should have been
Exactly.
courses. So
Now,
now they're teaching you.
now my chemistry teacher in high school, for example, held a PhD in organic chemistry, which that was a very rare thing for a black man at that time. But he was teaching in my high school. As a matter of fact, I sat under him in chemistry. As a matter of fact, a lot of our people had different ways to make money. Now, he taught school, but at the same time, he had his own chemical plant. Now, he would make different organic type products. He would make products as varied as lemon extract flavoring or vanilla extract flavoring for food or cakes or whatever. And then he would make products for health, liniment, for example, for people that want to rub their legs for arthritis and that kind of thing. And he would make hair care products. So he would be all over the ballpark as far as what he would make in his chemical plant. But at the same time, he didn't run it on a daily basis. What he would do is he would run it and make batches of this, and then he warehouse it until he sell that, and then he come and make another batch. But one of the things that I felt fortunate about was the fact that even at 13 years old, he allowed me to work for him because he had not just teaching school and a chemical factory, he also owned a grocery store. So he hired me in his grocery store when I was 13.
That's awesome. That's amazing. Recently I visited Uniontown with you. We went there together. We went there to do some work there, right? At the high school.
Yes.
And you showed me something on Uniontown Negro Elementary School. Now there's a part of that name missing because at some point they removed the Negro. I guess that was after integration.
Exactly. Well, during 1965, when the Civil Rights Act and all that came along, integration came, and it was really illegal to have segregated schools. So even though there was some integration, but the integration was mostly going in one direction. In other words, the integration was the black students integrating the white schools. We didn't have, I don't know, I would say we may have had, isolated instances where the white student would come to the black school, but very much in the opposite directions the way that was going. Now we had the name of the school that I grew up in was Uniontown Negro Elementary School. Didn't have a problem with it. But then after integration, they took the word Negro out. So if Uniontown was on the top line, Negro was on the second line, elementary school was on the third line, then they took out the second line.
And there's that big gap right there.
Yes, and it's still, if you go to Uniontown Negro Elementary School now and look, you will see Uniontown Skip Elementary School.
They didn't even move the lettering up, but there's this big gap.
Yeah, I'm not quite sure why that was done that way, because I think that was our people that did that. I don't think white folks had anything to do with it.
And it's a reminder. This is where we were, and this is where we were. Never forget your history, right? So, a personal question. And at what stage of your life did you interacted with white students your age?
Well, I was literally in college. I had gotten out of high school and left Uniontown, and I literally was in Huntsville, Alabama, where I went to Alabama A&M University, which was Alabama A&M College at the time. And it was a HBCU, historically Black university. But at the same time, I was in my freshman sociology class before I learned that Blacks were a minority in this country. I was in for a big shock. I was saying, what? I wanted to push back on that idea, because that was definitely not my experience. Everybody that I knew and saw and grew up with and was taught by and all that kind of stuff in my hometown of Uniontown were Black folk.
Wow.
So I just assumed that we were the majority.
You live in a country of where Black people was the majority, and that was so not true.
Yeah.
So that was quite a rude awakening for you.
Well, it was, to me, I feel that it was something new. It was a new concept that I had missed. But at the same time, I kind of felt an afterthought that I was probably way better off, because there is what I learned, especially for smaller children, a such thing as self-concept. So your self-concept is developed in your younger age. And I never grew up with a self-concept that I was less than, or, any of that, because, I still don't believe that we as a people are less than. I think I wouldn't even say more than. I think, there are individual standards, and everybody has a responsibility to take care of their own individual standard. I think white folk have their standard, Black folks have their standard individually. So I can't say, we were better or they were any worse. And I don't think in reality they have a basis for doing that either.
Except there was a system, an institution.
Exactly. So actually, after I got out of college and I was really exposed to the world of work, then that's when that rude awakening started to kick in. That, we are going out into the workplace now. So why is it that I have to, take this job, which may be lesser than some other job that I've looked at.
Because of
Yeah, because of a racial standpoint. On the one hand, but then on the other hand, I counted myself kind of lucky and blessed, and that when I did get into the corporate world was changing. We had President Jimmy Carter was in office at the time, and he had an initiative called the EEOC, Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. And that commission was responsible for putting some equity in the workplace. And they would go to the corporate America executive and say, well, we want to see some equity in the workplace, and we want to see some diversity in the workplace. And we want your company to be an integral part of it. And we will, as a government agency, enforce it. And they did. And that pulled some equity back into the workplace for a period of time. Now, one of the first jobs that I worked was as a pharmaceutical manufacturer representative. Now, that was new for Black people. I was one of the early adopters, or they were one of the early adopters to hire me into that industry, and that was a lily white, all males domain. And then even at one point, I took a part-time initiative where I was doing real estate sales. And believe it or not, back during that time, this was in the early 70s, that was an all-white male domain. They didn't have any females, very, very, very few. They had more Black people, a lot more Black people in that industry than they had white females. But luckily, I've always had good teachers, because when I was doing my training for the real estate industry, I had a white female teacher. She was brilliant. A lot of the real estate knowledge that I use today came straight out of her mouth. Now, she was an unusual character in that when she was teaching her class, I was taking a class in a high-rise office building and a conference room that she held her class. And what would happen is that the people in the building, predominantly white, they would pass by our classroom and they would look through the window in the door. And she got tired of that happening, because it happened just all the time. They're always peeking in, see what in the world is going on. There's a woman in there teaching a real estate class. So she stopped class one day and she said, well, I just want you to take note that people are always stopping looking in this window in this class. She said, I guess I feel like a two-headed cow. They just don't know what a woman real estate teacher looks like. So they had to see. So I kind of thought about that. And that was during the time when females were just beginning to get into the real estate industry. And as you know, that industry is pretty much dominated by females today. So
and not just into the real estate industry, into other types as well, I would imagine.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
No,
go ahead.
Let's talk about living during that segregation time, right? Time of segregation. How did segregation impact the way you dream about your future? Once you discover that there's such a thing as Black people are not the majority in this country, how did that affect you? Let's talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. See, I was really in college when I
Mhm.
recognized that that was the fact. Now, here again, I was lucky, I would say, or blessed. I was able to take advantage of an educational program in my HBCU that was a little bit different, a little bit unusual, a little bit more comprehensive than normal. By the time I started college, there was President Lyndon Baines Johnson that had taken over as the president at the death of John F. Kennedy, who was president. So John F. Kennedy had a reputation throughout the nation of being quite liberal, and he had advanced ideas about helping the Black race and that kind of thing. But after he got killed, then Lyndon Baines Johnson stepped up from vice president to president. And he, I believe, wanted to out Kennedy.
Mhm.
So his concept was, okay, you know what? People perceive me as being a Southern redneck out of Texas, and they perceive John F. Kennedy as being a liberal New Englander, but I'll show him. So he came up with this concept of the Great Society. And the Great Society is where he said that, well, I think if we can find a way to eliminate poverty, that we can build our society. And then he came in with a lot of programs. But he also came in with a program where he said that education is the key, especially a lot of these poverty-stricken kids coming out of the rural areas in the South. They have good minds, but at the same time, they need some exposure, what he called cultural enrichment.
Mhm.
He said a lot of these students never been anywhere, they never left their hometown, they never exposed to much. So he designed a program that changed all of that. He called it a 13 college curriculum revision program. And that's exactly what that program did. It revised the curriculum. So in other words, instead of when you go to a math class, instead of the teacher instructing us how to say, one number divided by another number, or algebraic equation that says X plus Y is equal to Z or whatever. Our curriculum revision had a little bit different twist on it. They would give us a set of facts. And they say, well, from an algebraic standpoint, how can you formulate an equation that can answer that question? So we had a little bit different twist on things, even though we did, have some. But here again, I just kind of feel like I was a beneficiary
Mhm.
of a lot of things that a lot of our people, you know, were not privy to. And then on the cultural enrichment standpoint, and I still believe highly in that today, if a student hasn't left home or hasn't seen anything or hasn't done anything different from what he always does from the time he was born, there is some limitations on him, and there's some limitation on the way he thinks and everything. But I think exposure is a wonderful thing. Anytime you can give that child exposure, a lot of time they learn more from the exposure than they can reading a book. And the way that exposure looked to me is during that program, they would literally put us on buses sometime and take us places.
Mm.
I remember our program sent us to Washington, D.C. on the bus. And we were able to, for my first time in my life, I ever seen Washington, D.C. And then, you know, there were other places. There was, say, for example, they took us to New Orleans. And I always heard about New Orleans, but I'd never been to New Orleans.
Yeah, that's so interesting, right? And I say it's interesting because recently, when I visited Uniontown, I was just amazed and blown away. And the current state of Uniontown, and when you say that it's actually worse than it was during those days, things seem that it's going backwards.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll tell you one of the reasons why.
Mm.
Our people, the Black folk in Uniontown, even though we were about 80% of the population, we didn't control anything.
Mm.
We didn't control commerce. I wouldn't say all, there were a good number of small business people that would have, you know, a nightclub, or they would have a grocery store, or they would have a farm that grew contract produce or something like that, you know. But as far as the people who are literally owning the commerce, you know, those were white people. And the history of Uniontown, they were not just white people that grew up in the South. When Uniontown was established, the bulk of the white people who came to the South were given land. And they were given land to settle, you know, that area. And a lot of the people, we had what we call planters. And the planters were the people who would plant the cotton and plant, you know, they were the people that worked the land. But then we had another class of white folk that called merchants. The merchants were the people who ran the town. They were the ones who owned the stores, the hardware stores, the cleaners, the banks, the gas stations, all of those kind of businesses like that. 95% of those businesses were owned by white folk. But what happened is that since we had the majority, and as soon as we got the right to vote in the early 60s, well, it was late 60s, sorry, we literally went to the polls and we voted ourselves into office.
Mm.
So we had the majority of the people, and we voted ourselves as the mayor. The mayor chose as police chief, and the white folks pushed back on that. They said, "Oh no, I don't want to work under a black mayor. So what they literally did was the vast majority of white folk moved out of town. They moved to other surrounding towns. But the problem was when they moved, they took their money with them. They took their businesses with them. So Uniontown, without the white folk businesses, without their money that they had taken out of the system, well, then, our little town went into a pretty sharp decline. That was on the one hand. But then there was another decline going on the other hand. And that second decline is what I call a brain drain. The brain drain happened to Black folk who, the minute they graduate from high school, and I was one of them, the minute they graduate from high school, man, the next day or so, they're on the Greyhound bus headed north. I graduated on a Friday. That Saturday, I was at home packing my bags, and that Sunday I was on a Greyhound bus headed to Detroit, Michigan.
And that's such an important point. And fast forward to today. Okay. You're a young man, graduating high school, and you decide to stay home. What do you do? What's your choice?
See, that's the problem. Mm-hmm. That was the problem, because it was such a brain drain until very few of our people stayed home. Very few of our students that graduated from high school stayed home. And the ones who stayed home, they just, did what they always did, whether it was, cotton wasn't in vogue at that time, but, they would raise cash crops. Mm. We had a canning factory in my little hometown. And when I was there, after cotton went out of vogue, then that's what we did. We raised okra by the acres, but we would sell it to the canning factory. Mm. So the ones who stayed, it wasn't that they were just there twiddling their thumbs idle. A lot of people raise livestock. They raise cattle. A lot of them, just did what they were doing when they were growing up.
Mm-hmm. They did what they had to do.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. But see, when I went to Detroit, there were much bigger and better opportunities where you get paid, pretty substantial money.
And I should say that the sun is very hot and the land is real flat in the Black Belt region. Oh, and the sun is on your back all the time.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. We were able to put up with it in that everybody wore sun hats. So, once you cover your head, you kind of shade yourself somewhat. Mm. And then in the middle of the day, when it's very extremely hot, the sun is at its peak in the sky, we would take breaks and go ahead and, make lunch or sit in the shade and, that kind of stuff, where we were able to get by.
Dr. Hines, visiting Uniontown, I noticed that there are a number of churches, but the doors are closed.
Yeah.
They're falling apart. Left
Exactly.
abandoned.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's obvious that growing up, faith, family values was very important. But why are these churches still all these dilapidated buildings still there?
Okay. That is tied very much into the fact that the churches that are vacant there now were what we used to call the white churches. They were the churches that were attended by the white people. And once they left Uniontown en masse, then they left their churches. But at the same time, you know, I had my eye on one of those churches. It's a beautiful edifice. And I was kind of thinking, well, maybe if I could acquire that church, you know, maybe I could repurpose it or do something else with it or whatever. But come to find out that the people who own the church said, no, we're not selling. So therefore, they're just sitting there empty.
And they're not selling and they're not renovating.
They're not selling it, not renovating it. It's just there. See, they left Uniontown in the late 60s. And those churches have pretty much been sitting there vacant since the late 60s. And what is that? That's what, 50 years ago or whatever?
You know, when we look at time, and we're talking about not that long ago, 50 years. We're talking about things that happened certainly in your lifetime, because you're talking about your history. What
Yeah,
you went through. It's not that long ago.
that's right.
Just the other day, right?
Exactly.
And and that's serious stuff, because it shows what life was like just the other day.
Yeah.
Just the other day.
Yeah.
Not
A lot of these new developments that we know today, you know, it came in, you know, since that time, since the mid 60s. A lot of that, you know, opportunities that we see and the way we think about opportunity today, it was very much, in my world, limited as to what you could do and how you could do it. So I think, you know, as a way of life today, it is different. And I would have to say that it's better. It's different and it's better than it was, because now you can use your own resources. You can use your own wherewithal as far as your concept as to what you want to do, what you want to be, how you want to do it. You can use your own imagination to carry you to places that your imagination may not have had the ability to take you at that time. So I think it's a better world today. You know, in fairness, I think it's better.
Yeah, no doubt about that. No doubt about that. But looking back, Dr. Hines, looking back, what would you say to young people today who are struggling with their identity and systemic challenges?
Yeah. Well, there's a number of things that I think should be done. And I think I would put it as a priority. I would say this first. I think it is incumbent upon the parent to make sure that our children grow up with a strong self-esteem. I think that is the basis of everything that underlies the whole infrastructure of a human being. Now, I have seen it in my childhood, but I see it probably even more today. Sometimes I see parents putting their children down. Well, you're no good, or you never be anything, or that kind of foolishness. That's wrong.
Mm.
I think when that happens, what you're doing is you're helping that child to build their own self-concept. And self-concept is a powerful thing for everybody, really, because once you establish your self-concept, you establish it from your own perspective, but you also use a lot of input from those around you. And if those around you tell you that you're no good, or you will never be nothing, or all these kind of derogatory comments, and if you're not strong enough to push back and say no, and that's what I recommend the child will do. Push back every time, not every once in a while, every time. They say, well, you never amount to anything. That's not true. Push back. And I think, if the parent would be a lot more conscious of what they are saying to their children, how they are helping that child to build their own self-concept, I think, we'll be in a better place over time. So, that's the one thing. But there's a number of other, initiatives I think that we should pursue. I'll tell you one more. We've always been taught, even in school, that, okay, well, use your 5 senses. They say, well, you got 5 senses, use them. Mm. You got the sense of sight. You can see, or you can hear, you can smell, you can taste, and you can touch. And see, we were left right there. Mm. And we bought into that. Well, I got 5 senses, but no, you got way more than 5 senses. You have, I'd say 10, 15 senses. I'd say 15 senses because you have your imagination. That's there was a saying that your imagination is the greatest nation in your world. So, but most people just kind of don't even think about their imagination. Even if they think about it, they won't use it. But your imagination is a very powerful sense. And I think when you use your imagination to your advantage, it will push you far. Another one of the senses I would say is your will. Your will is very powerful. And if you don't recognize how powerful your will is, you may let it go dormant and don't work for you. Mm-hmm. But I think, especially when we're teaching our kids, well, this is for everybody, not just for the kids. I would say use your will, because your will can make you go forward in a way that if it's not exerted, you won't even go. Some people have a will to. I talked to somebody recently, and they said that their parents, or one of their parents, had a will to see a certain thing happen in their family. Even though they were kind of on their last leg with illness, they decided they'd use their will to hold on until it happened. And then once it happened, they were able to just let go and move on to the other side. And I kind of thought of that same thing just last week when the Pope died. The Pope died one day after Easter. And I just honestly believe that he held on until his Easter responsibilities and duties were done. And then the day after Easter, he just let go. So I believe the will is a powerful thing. There are a lot more. I'm not going to,
Yeah, we'll have another conversation about senses,
Okay.
because certainly what we've been told, much of what we've been told about so many things, we need to revisit.
Exactly. We need to revisit it and we need to rethink it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Now, Dr. Hines, if you could leave us with one piece of life-changing advice. Of course, we're on life-changing conversations that inspire action. Now, leave us one piece of life-changing advice, right? To
Okay.
inspire actions.
All right. Well, I would say let's spend our time and our energy to try and balance our life. Try to have a good balance in your life. We all have 24 hours a day. And I think a good life balance would be to split it up in, say, 3 segments. Say 8 hours, 8 hours, 8 hours. I think that could represent a good life. 8 hours of hard work. I think that helps. 8 hours of good sleep. I think that helps. And 8 hours of, I'd call it the 3, you spend time with your family, your friends, and attend to your faith. I think that's one part of that 8 hours, but I think that third 8 hours where you're dedicating to, what I call kind of housekeeping kind of stuff. That family, friends, and faith, I think that's important. But there are also, a need to kind of take a look at what you're doing with your health, your hygiene, and then your hobbies. I think all of those are important. And then if I had to say one more thing that I think you need to take into account is probably one of the most important. Take a close look at how you are handling your soul. And then, it's kind of like what we do together in some of our organizations. We can't leave out service. I think service has a very important role, and not just our life, but in our well-being. And then every once in a while, if you can crack out a big, nice smile, I think that would help.
That'll go a long way. Dr. Hines, you don't mind if I call you the 888 man?
Oh no, that would be a blessing. That would be an honor.
The 888 man.
888 man. Yes.
Right. Gotta get that 8 hours in there, hard work.
Yeah.
They gotta get that rest in there. and life's enjoyment, spending time with family, service, and all the good stuff to
Yeah.
build the human community and family.
Yeah.
So great advice. Now, Dr. Hines, as we get ready to wrap up, is there anything else you want to add that you have not already said?
Well, I I just think that if we pay attention, to how we live, I think we'd be better off. In other words, a lot of our young people, and old people too, they'll get involved in doing drugs and overindulging in this and that, and it causes detriment to their health in the long run. I would say just pay more attention to that. And if it's something you think that it's not going to benefit you in the long run, just take it out of your life. That's what I believe.
I think it's important to have alignment with your objectives.
Exactly.
And I think that's a way to summarize what you just said.
Exactly.
Whatever it is you're doing, make sure it's serving an objective in your life, and a good objective at that.
Exactly.
Now, let me take the opportunity to say thank you to Chrisone, Elizabeth, Dr. Lexi, my friend, and Ms. Hibbert, Lisa, Irene, Rosemarie, Gerard, and all those who joined us today from different parts of the world. We really appreciate you joining us. And for you, Dr. Hines, I know we will continue this conversation. This conversation we're having tonight came about because I myself, I was blown away when I went to Uniontown with you. I was blown away. We study history and we read about all these things, but there's nothing like experiencing it, like going there and visiting Uniontown. It's just an amazing, sad and amazing in so many ways to see that the progress and from you hearing it from you, things are not moving forward. And that's true for so many of the towns or cities in the Black Belt region, not just Uniontown. And the common denominator is when there are Black people elected in these towns. So you have Black governance, so to speak. People with money, with resources do what? They move. They take their monies elsewhere. And that is still happening, unfortunately.
Yeah.
You could even see the capital. What's the capital of Alabama?
Montgomery.
Montgomery is not growing.
Yeah.
It's not growing. And so you have a Black mayor there, right?
Yes.
And Black government there. And the same thing is happening even in the capital of the state. And that is, I would argue that is probably true for other states as well, not just Alabama. So I just want to say thank you for joining me today. And this is not the end of our conversation about, raised in the Black Belt region of the United States. It's pre-integration. All right. So we're talking during segregation period and after. So what we heard today wasn't just a story.
Well, let me interject one more thing. I think a lot of the reasons behind you go to these Black governed places, money is the king. Mm-hmm. Whoever controls the money controls. So I think if we have the numbers and we elect ourselves, but we don't have the financial control and backing. I think that's part of the problem. I don't think it's just, because it's a black guy that's running it.
No, it's the money.
Yeah.
Because when we are self-rule and you don't have the resources and the
There
people,
you go. That's it right there.
You're not going to rule me.
Exactly.
You're not going to make decisions for me.
Yeah.
They walk with the money.
There you go.
They walk with the funds, right? So again, what we heard today wasn't just a story. It was a mirror reflecting the strength, the courage, and the relentless hope born out of the black belt soil. Dr. Hines showed us that even in a world built to hold you back, a spirit rooted in faith, family, and determination can never be buried. Dr. Hines, your journey reminds us that where you come from may shape you, but it does not define who you are. And the struggles of the past are not just painful memories, they are living lessons, etching the blueprint of resilience that we carry forward. So to everyone listening, let today's conversation stir something inside of you. Let it challenge you to honor the sacrifices of those who came before us, not just with remembrance, but with action. Because true change doesn't happen by chance. It happens by choice. And it starts with conversations like this one that we're having today. And the hope is to inspire us to move, to build, to lead, and to never forget the power of where we came from, whether it was good or bad, because there's power in it. So with that, I would say thank you for joining us today on Life-Changing Conversation to Inspire Actions. And I know we did just that today. All right, thank you.
And thank you.
We've all had moments that break us down, searching for light when the world spins round. But in those cracks, the purpose is born, a new way to live when the old is torn. It's more than a story, it's the rise from the fall, a place where your purpose starts to call. With Dr. Stephenson, wisdom takes flight, turning your pain into hope, into light. Collide with purpose, embrace the change. Every story's got a fire in its flame. Tune in, listen, find your way to take life's hardest hits and turn the page. In the podcast, the truth is found. Collide with purpose, let love abound. From heartbreak to strength,